When I initially married Emily, everything appeared ideal. We were young in a romantic relationship, and from the we appeared to be the perfect pair from the outside. However, soon after, cracks started to show, and I couldn't first ignore them. Emily appeared encouraging as I put in a lot of work to create a future for us. But shortly actions began to wear me down. She would taking substantial amounts of money out of our joint account without providing a reason, abandoning me having financial difficulties while I approached her. She would say that I wasn't getting enough money to make me feel like my efforts were consistently not meeting the even worse was the emotional toll she ceased expressing interest in anything we previously delighted in our romantic evenings. Evolved into commitments, and she devoted the most of her spending time in bed, saying she was too exhausted to cease attempting to organize events since it felt useless. And the things that hurt the most were the charges she made against me were preventing our son from seeing her in spite of her disinterest in wasting time. I started to feel as though I was the issue in any circumstance, regardless if I took the emotional distance. As our relationship grew, Emily started spending the night away from home, saying she was remaining with friends. But after I inquired regarding it, she would silence me or changing the topic. I understood that I couldn't. I can longer trust her with the affection I once felt, for resentment replaced her as she waned. I made an effort to keep our youngster safe, but he may observe the tension as well, and he was perplexed and hurt, and I was powerless to. I recommended going to therapy to fix it, but she appeared happy and uninterested in the world she lives in, which is no longer including me, at which point I became aware of our. Eventually, the marriage ended. Emily informed me that she was moving on to someone else. A mixture of relieved dread and fear was present, of uncertainty and comfort that the ongoing stress was ultimately coming to an end. When she went, I became aware of how much I'd maintained a grip on anything that was our marriage had already ended. For a while, I was emotionally dead, and I had simply been too worn out to accept it. Following Emily's departure, everything felt like a fade. She divorced, and the entire. The procedure seemed unreal, and I wasn't sure what to anticipate, yet I felt a sense of relief. The burden of residing in a fractured marriage had been abolished at last, but the unknowns of post-divorce life were intimidating. I had no idea how things might unfold, but I knew I had to battle. For my sanity and tranquility first. A challenge arose with Emily's documentation. The attorney committed a series of errors using inaccurate dates, names, and even errors about our child's information and possessions, thought the entire procedure was dragging due to these mistakes. But as annoying as that was, I perceived it as an opportunity. Throughout the protracted divorce, I could have spent more time getting ready for what was. The court dates become interminable in the future. Loop of delays. I finally raised my voice, highlighting how her attorney's everything was being held up by incompetence. That benefited me since I was able to avoid being required to pay for the prolonged legal fees. It seemed like a minor triumph in the amid circumstances that were far from ideal. The divorce was ultimately. Emily retained the house when everything was done. Divorce? And obtained our son's custody? She went to live with the man she had split from me. However, I discovered later that he was abusive. I experienced my first pang of compassion for her, but it didn't alter the reality that she had left, and that I have to concentrate on starting over. I took charge of my money following the divorce password changes and security accounts. Without any financial surprises, I had learned about poor management from our marriage's errors. In the interim, Emily was abandoned to fend for herself. I didn't want to provide the backing. No longer as difficult for her as it was. The divorce seemed like the start of something new. Chapter. It became evident to me that the cycle of marriage had been exhausting. Financial manipulation and emotional manipulation stress. I simply had to keep going. Gradually following the divorce, I initiated to experience a feeling of liberty that I hadn't experienced in years. Things were far away from flawless, Yet they were superior. Then residing in the perpetual turmoil of my marriage took an unexpected turn when Emily's inability to make mortgage payments led to the collapse of our home. A few months following the divorce, I got a call at the bank from her uncle. Was prepared to reclaim the home, and he inquired if I would be interested in purchasing. I was apprehensive at first, but after recognized the chance I presented to buy the house from him and give it to it felt surprising that the sale went through, like a strange turn of events but possessing. It turns out that the house was a good choice, not only provided me with stability in my finances, but it provided me with an area to reconstruct. As time went by, I started working out because I was self-centered, shed a few pounds, and even got an advancement in work. I was beginning to discover again who I was apart from my dating for marriage became a possibility. Once more, even if I didn't jump right into anything serious, I had a great time meeting new people. And regaining my sense of self. I was living in the new house at the time. Prospects and the development of the individual were indications that I was relocating within the life after divorce has taken the correct course. Its difficulties, but it was also packed with surprising benefits. A year following the divorce, when matters were at last beginning to feel as though they were dropping, Emily returned to her spot in the image that caught me off guard. But one. This evening, I unexpectedly got a "my heart fell" when I received her message. Her name appeared on the screen, and it had been so long and I had put a lot of effort into moving on, but she was pushing her way there. "Brad, can we talk about getting back into my life?" It was easy to understand the content, however. Its weight felt significantly greater than I should have paused for a moment. Pause before responding. Uncertain of what she wanted to know what you needed. I typed back to Emily, attempting to maintain my keeping her emotions in check. She answered, nearly inquiring right away whether we could meet in person. I initially convinced myself that I didn't wish to keep her around any longer. Machinations. Yet something within me, something profound that had not I, was urged to completely let go of our history. Agreed. I wanted to hear the conclusion. Her perspective when we first met at the cafe the next day. She appeared different. Her weight had decreased, and her eyes no longer. The same hardness was conveyed by the lengthier automobile. There used to be a sense of vulnerability I hadn't noticed in her observed before, to her greeting me with a hesitant smile that seems to be trying things out. "Hello, Brad," she said in a softer tone than I did. Recalling, I nodded while attempting to keep your distance, Emily. "How is she doing?" Her smile vanished when she took a seat across from "I've been thinking about us a lot." Regarding what transpired, she opened her eyes, looking for a clue in mine that I know things ended, yet I might still care. Terrible, but I believe we can still make it work. I want to raise Brad because I've changed, our child together, and I believe that we ought to, for the benefit of her family, try again. The remarks were like a kick to the gut. Not that I hadn't considered the potential for reconciliation. It was that I was already over it. That I had already spent so long lamenting the passing of our connection, and now that I'd discovered she wanted to take me away from my own tranquility, I glanced at her and was thrown back into the commotion, truly examined her, and came to the conclusion that she was still the same. Nothing had changed. The same individual who had harmed me had deceived me, and nearly caused me to shatter. The only thing that had changed was that she was attempting to use guilt to control me, claiming to have flipped a new leaf when I could see that her motivations stemmed from a distant additional. "Emily," I remarked in a firm voice, self-serving, "but rest assured I've moved on and I'm not eager to reunite. What we're done, and I'm cool with that." Her expression dropped, but she wasn't finished. "You don't seem to realize that I'm not requesting a lot in order for me to return home so that we can reunite as a family. I'll even reimburse the money that I owe you if aren't we trying to make this work? Worth it," since I was shocked by what I was learning that she was willing to reimburse me the money as if it were a big issue. To make everything right as though I could, I said, "But I'm not doing this. This isn't about money." I'm shaking my head. or about making things work for you, Emily. You deceived and cheated on me, robbed me of everything, and now you want to return to my life like nothing at all. No, I will not participate in your game. More. Her eyes grew gloomy, and she took taking a big breath in an attempt to gather herself. She was clearly unhappy, but I couldn't allow that to deter me. I had been weakened for too long, and I had no intention of fall for her antics once more, as she attempted to encourage me to continue discussing the topics. Together we might fix it, but I stood my, "No, Emily, this is finished. If you truly care for our child, you must, don't use me as a crutch for your emotions. I'm not the solution to any issue. You're carrying out what I stood for, settling with," a sense of finality over me. But it wasn't simple. I left. Of that cafe, abandoning her to cope with. Using her own repercussions following your encounter with, I assumed that would be the end of it, Emily. I had expressed my lack of interest clearly. Reopening old wounds, I reasoned she would come to terms with it and go on, but it didn't work that way with Emily. Over the following few weeks, I felt as though I was always keeping an eye on my back. I'm preparing myself for when she would attempt to control me or play the victim. But what caught me off guard the most was I wasn't hearing from her because of her silence. No more texts, no more calls. She seems to have given up. For the first time in her life, maybe she understood that I wouldn't give in to. In contrast to her demands, I was going forward wasn't simple, and nobody truly discusses how draining it is to recover from something as distressing as a divorce. But I was slowly but surely, I was taking back my life, which involved placing myself in back outside, despite the fact that it felt like an enormous risk, which is how I met Michelle. Encountered via common pals at a meeting one evening, she seemed amiable, with a lightheartedness that made me feel at ease immediately. But she wasn't searching for anything challenging, just someone to spend time with and share some laughs and enjoy life, I initially believed. Perhaps I was in a hurry, but something felt correct about her. She wasn't like Emily was emotionally detached. She was attempting to dump her burdens on me. She didn't want anything from me either, so we began with a simple link. Regularly seeing each other wasn't. Sincerely, I didn't want to hurry at first into anything, but with time, I found myself anticipating our time together. We would take weekend getaways together, explore new eateries, and dedicate hours to discussing everything and nothing at all. I was unaware of how much I had been missing. Genuine friendship prior to Michelle's arrival entered my life, although Emily, of course, couldn't remain absent indefinitely. It was on a Saturday afternoon, I received the initial communication from her. I had recently completed Michelle and I went on a morning trek and were preparing to unwind for the day when I knew the number when my phone buzzed. I recognized Emily Brad right away. "You've moved on. Are you content right now?" The message was that she was making you happy. Chilly, but the tone was evident of resentment in her remarks. I didn't reply immediately. I simply gazed at the screen. Experiencing the familiar bubble of resentment, I could feel her weight when I was up. Jealousy, her desire for dominance, and it was frustrating, however. This time I had changed, and I demonstrated. Michelle received the message. And she was as always helpful. "You owe her nothing." She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Anything. You've put in a lot of effort to get this stage. Avoid being drawn back into her." Michelle's remarks struck a chord with me, and I realized she was correct. So rather than reacting in a furious or frustrated manner, I was just blocking Emily's number, willing to allow her to interfere with the piece I had worked really hard to produce. Yet the next week, Emily took things to the next level. She arrived at my door early in the morning. On a Monday morning, I sat at the drinking coffee at the kitchen table when I heard a knock. I didn't give it much thought at first, but when I saw her when I opened the door, my heart plummeted as I stood there. "What do you?" I asked in a cold voice. "Want, Emily?" "Wasted no time in seeing you with I know what," she said in a harsh tone. You're acting as though you can just go on with someone else and forget about me. Otherwise, don't you? I tried to remain composed, but Emily's old wrath returned, and we're completed. I've gone on, and I owe you nothing. Clarifications, and I most definitely don't. I apologize. She took a step closer, as though she believed that being close would make me rethink what you're, Brad. You're not who I thought you were. You once loved me, I said, shaking my head. I used to think it didn't matter. The individual you were in the past is not who you have now deceived and cheated on me, ruined all we owned there. There is nothing left to preserve the quiet that was so loud for a little minute that I believed she could become upset, that she would begin to cry, but she refrained. Instead, she stood there with her face in tears. I hope you understand what you're doing, Brad, she murmured softly. You will regret this because it is loaded with venom. Moment she turned and left without saying anything, I closed the door behind me while glancing back and tightened my chest against it. Have anticipated something similar. Nonetheless, it didn't make things any simpler to cope with. I said nothing regarding the encounter, unwilling to provide Emily with the contentment at knowing it had an impact. Michelle was aware that I had been visited, and she simply held me for a brief period, allowing me to feel secure in her company. She muttered, I'm not alone anymore. And I realized then that she was immediately after. When Emily came to visit, I felt like a weight had been removed, but recovery took time. However, everything felt different with Michelle. Distinct, unmanipulated, and sincere relationship. Thinking back on my history with Emily, I became aware of what I had given up, trying to fix what couldn't make me happy. The best way to be saved was to walk away. Choice to proceed, I inquired. Michelle will accompany me into the house that Emily and I used to share, turning it into a representation of my fresh start. Michelle was encouraging, and we made it ours one night, and she said she was correct, and now you're where you belong. Had released and discovered tranquility, Michelle and I became more intimate, creating a happy, healthy relationship devoid of manipulation. For the first time, I wasn't only getting by, was doing well. Emily made an effort to get in touch with me, but I stopped answering. Establishing limits, her issues weren't Michelle's problem, is no longer mine. Continuous assistance served as a reminder of how far I'd come. You've changed a lot, she said. Tonight, I concurred that I've discovered how to take charge of my personal fulfillment. With Michelle at my side, I felt at last tranquility. The past doesn't find me anymore. Was prepared for whatever lay ahead. I appreciate you watching.